Wake Up Groundhog by Susanna Leonard Hill, illustrated by Jeffrey Ebeler. Tomorrow we'll find out if the groundhog wakes up, and if he sees his shadow, we'll have more weeks of winter. If not, then it'll be an early spring. So let's see. We're going to take a prediction too. Phyllis was not like the other groundhogs. She liked to get up in February instead of in March. She liked to be outdoors instead of indoors. When spring rains soaked the earth and everyone else huddled in the burrow, Phyllis splashed in the puddles. You're sopping wet, her mother scolded. I like the way the mud feels between my toes, she explained. Her mother shook her head and said, That's Phyllis. When the stream water rushed ice and cold, fierce between the banks, Phyllis went wading. You'll catch a cold, said her Aunt Patsy. Phyllis's mother shook her head. That's Phyllis. When the August sun beat down, turning the meadow brown, Phyllis picked blackberries warm and sweet. You'll bake this in the heat, Auntie Sassy cried. And guess what Phyllis's mother said? Well, that's Phyllis. When I grow up, Phyllis said, I'm going to be the Puxatawny Phil. Don't be silly, dear. Her mother said, Puxatawny Phil is a fellow. The other grown-ups laughed, but Phyllis knew she could do it, even if no one took her seriously. And then one February morning, Phyllis woke up. She crawled out of bed. She crept through the tunnel. The first light of morning shone in the mouth of the groundhog hole, and from the big pine trees came the steady drip, drip, drip of snow melting. Running water whispered in the brook. The air was sharp, but something about it had changed. Spring was coming early. She skipped back down the tunnel to wait for Uncle Phil to wake up and make his prediction. Phyllis, would you quit wiggling? Complained Phil Jr. Yeah, Phyllis, said Pete. Some of us are trying to sleep. How can you sleep when spring is in the air? Phil Jr. looked at Pete. Only Phyllis would think spring was coming in the middle of winter. It's not the middle. It's Groundhog Day. But Phil Jr. and Pete were already dozing, sleeping away. Pretty soon, Aunt Sassy got up and tried to wake Uncle Phil. She shook him and tugged his whiskers. She shouted in his ear. Everyone else in the burrow woke up, but he kept on snoring. What's all this ruckus? Grandfather Groundhog said. It's Groundhog Day. And Phil is still asleep. I'm afraid he's getting too old for his job. I'll do it, said Phyllis. Everyone laughed. Punxsutawney Phil has never been a girl, and never will be, Phil Jr. taunted. Nobody's going to get the job until Phil gives it up, said Aunt Sassy. Now how are we going to wake him? Dump some snow on him, said Phyllis. Good idea. And it worked. Whew, he's up. Uncle Phil grumbled. It's time to get up. It's time to get up. It's Groundhog Day. I'm sleepy, he complained. If you're too tired, I'd be happy to do the job for you. Not just anyone can be Punxsutawney Phil. I'm not just anyone, said Phyllis. Is your name Phil? No, Phyllis admitted, but Punxsutawney Phil's real name isn't always Phil. Yes, well, grumbled Uncle Phil, but were you born in the Groundhog Day? I was born the day after, Phyllis said. Not good enough, said Uncle Phil. Besides, you are a girl. When the time comes, one of those young fellows will fit the ticket. Phil Jr. and Pete smirked. They can't even feel that spring is in the air, Phyllis said scornfully. We never have an early spring, said Uncle Phil. In all my years as Punxsutawney Phil, it's never happened once. It's going to happen this year, Phyllis said stubbornly. Aunt Patsy chuckled. That's Phyllis, she said. Phyllis wished people would stop saying that. Phyllis, come up here with me and see what the world looks like in February, said Uncle Phil. Then you'll know that I'm right. Phyllis couldn't believe her luck. They walked up the long tunnel, emerged into the light. Uncle Phil sat up on his hind legs and sniffed the air, just as I thought. 6 more weeks of winter. Early spring, insisted Phyllis. Look at all that snow, said Uncle Phil. Feel the cold. The snow is melting, said Phyllis, and the water is running in the brook. Uncle Phil tilted his head, and he listened. So it is. I don't hear as well as I used to. The chickadees are singing their spring song, said Phyllis. I've never heard the chickadees on Groundhog Day. And look, Uncle Phil, no shadows. My eyes aren't as clear as they used to be, said Uncle Phil. And don't you smell the sweetness of spring? Just a hint, he murmured. And there's something else, said Phyllis. She finally figured out what felt different in the air this morning. Feel the wind? It's from the west, the spring zephyr. Well, I'll be jiggered, said Uncle Phil. Phyllis was right. Uncle Phil announced when they returned to the burrow, we are going to have an early spring. It's time for me to retire. But who will be the next Punxsutawney Phil? I will, said Phil Jr. No, I will, said Pete. Sorry, boy, said Uncle Phil. You've missed the signs. You can't mean, blustered Phil. Yes, boy, said Uncle Phil. This time, the best Phil for the job is a Phyllis. Hooray! But what about the rules? If Mother Nature can bend the rules once in a while, said Uncle Phil, we can too. Phyllis heard the water in the brook and the song of the birds. She saw there was no shadow, and she felt the spring air. That's Phyllis, her mother said proudly. Phyllis grinned and said, Punxsutawney, Phyllis. So Groundhog Day is an American and Canadian tradition celebrated every year on February 2nd. Why February 2nd? Because it is the midpoint of winter, falling exactly halfway between the winter solstice and the spring equinox. So Groundhog Day is a big day, and people watch the news to see if when they hold up the groundhog, if he sees his shadow, if he runs back in. It's a whole to-do. So we will watch it, we will talk about it, and we'll make some predictions. But in your journal today, for your journal entry, we're going to write about our favorite season. So sometimes they say, yes, we're going to have 6 more weeks of winter, or no, spring's coming early. So do you like spring or winter better? So my question for you is, do you like, I'll write it at the top, so you don't have to, but just so you know what you are writing about in your journal, do you like winter or spring better? Which one would you prefer? So tomorrow I'll ask everybody, and then we'll write, or not tomorrow, I'm talking about Monday. We'll talk about which one is our favorite. I'll do spring votes over here, and we'll graph it, and winter votes over here. But today in your journal, draw a picture of which one you like. So Mrs. Osmer is going to do her sentence. Yours will look different. You do your own ideas. I'm just going to get out my marker so you can see what I'm writing. I like spring. And you can tell your grown-up why, and they can write it. Because, or I like warm weather. It's your decision. And then draw your picture. And I'm going to draw a nice spring scene. If you do the winter, you might draw snow or skiing or what you like to do in the winter. I'm going to draw a little spring picture with some sunshine, some birds maybe, flowers, things like that that remind me of the spring. Maybe even a butterfly, just like so. So you pick your favorite spring or winter and tell us why through your journal page, and we will share. All right, see you soon.